and welcome to Logan Sounds Off, where I talk about books, music, and a whole lot more. I'm your host, Logan Kelly. Hello and welcome back to Logan Sounds Off. Today I am interviewing the one and only Ron Sexsmith. Hello Ron, how are you?
Hi Logan, I'm good. How's yourself?
I'm brilliant, thank you for asking. Before we get started, I just wanted to ask you, for those who don't know you or aren't familiar with your music, could you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Well, I'm a guy from Canada. I was born in 1964, a long time ago, and I grew up just really being drawn to music, on the radio. I grew up in a very melodic period of music, I think, with the Beatles and the Kinks and all these groups. And it really kind of made a huge impression on me. And so years later, when I was around 20 or 21, I started to try writing my own songs. And I had all this music in my DNA that I heard growing up, So now I've somehow I got lucky and I got a record deal, and I've and now I've made 17 records, and I'm kind of a survivor of the music industry in a way. So yeah.
That's crazy. And actually, this is Ron's most recent album, The Vivian Line. So I'll have a little talk about that later on. But first of all, that I want to ask you about, you mentioned there that you grew up in the mid-60s. Well, not grew up, but you were born in the mid-60s. So you were surrounded by all these different genres and music groups. You spoke a bit about the music scene there, but could you elaborate a bit more? Because I think it's very interesting what happened at that time.
Well, it's funny because on one hand, I was raised by my mom, and she had a bunch of 45 records, those little small ones. And she let me play them, when I was really young, which I think a lot of parents might not let their kids play with their records, And they were mostly country records in 1950s doo-wop music. And I loved all that. And at the same time on the radio, it was that age of, all the British invasion. It was also a lot of great folk music, Canadian folk music and stuff being played on the radio. And everything at that time just sounded great to me. The lyrics were really thought-provoking. I mean, imagine you're a little kid and you hear a song like Nowhere Man on the radio by the Beatles. And that seemed like such a strange concept, Nowhere Man. And I would sort of ponder these lyrics as a kid. And then I became a big fan of Elton John, who, there was a girl in my class who I had a crush on and who was really into Elton John. And so I thought, well, I'm going to get into Elton John too, because I like this girl. But then I became a big Elton John fan. In fact, my first concert was Elton John when I was 11 years old. And that's when I started thinking, well, maybe I could do this. I wore glasses too, so maybe I could be Elton John or something. And that's, and I started then dreaming about it. I don't know if I answered your question, but I pretty much, I loved all kinds of music as a kid. When I got older, I got maybe a little more selective, but as a kid, everything just sounded amazing to me.
No, that makes total sense. And one of your main inspirations that you mentioned before in a couple of interviews and things was Buddy Holly, and as you were saying there, Elton John. And you've mentioned that you started playing guitar at 14. So that would be an older age. Some people would say that's a bit of an older age to get started with an instrument. Others would say that's very young. But what I wanted to ask was that obviously Buddy Holly might have inspired you to play guitar, but were there any other musicians as well?
Well, it's kind of funny because I never wanted to play the guitar. My favorite instrument was the piano, because of Elton and Harry Nilsson and all that. But what happened is I joined a band and nobody wanted to play the guitar. So I got sort of forced into it, And so I started taking some lessons, and I was really impatient because I could see on television whenever musicians were playing, they were doing something with their hands with their left hand, and I wanted to figure out what these things were, these chords. And my guitar teacher wouldn't teach me chords. He was trying to teach me Mary Had a Little Lamb and all this kind of stuff. So I bought a Beatle guitar book for beginners, and I started teaching myself. So guitar for me was kind of like second prize. I got really into it though, and probably my favorite guitar player would be Pete Townsend of The Who. I just thought that guy's really exciting when he plays. And I don't mean like doing the windmills and sing. I just mean the way he plays. And then I became a big fan of what Dave Davies of the Kinks was doing, and I liked a lot of hard rock music actually in my teens. You know, Zeppelin, and I loved Deep Purple, and I tried to play that kind of music, but I wasn't very convincing. You know, I didn't have the right voice or something. But I still listened to a lot of like hard rock music. So yeah, I mean, so it was this kind of thing where now I think I'm pretty confident with the guitar. But since my 40s, I've been learning the piano, and I write a lot on piano now these days.
Yeah, wow. So you actually spoke a lot about there, and you spoke about a band that you started, which was Ron Sexsmith and the Uncool. And I wanted to ask, how did that come about, and what did that entail?
Well, that happened around 1987. I just moved to Toronto to try to make it in music, and I got a job working as a courier, you know, delivering packages in Toronto at this place called Sunwheel Courier Company. And there was another fellow there named Don Kerr, who was also a courier. And he'd heard that I was a songwriter, and he was a drummer, and he had a friend who played bass, and he said, you know, if you want to come over and jam with us, and I was a songwriter looking for a band, and they were a band looking for a songwriter. So it was kind of perfect. And the very first gig I ever played with them was the Christmas party for the Sunwheel Courier Company in 1987. And I think we did mostly covers, but I was also, some of my early songs I was starting to play. So yeah, you know, we just did the clubs in Toronto, and there was a few moments where we had a little buzz going, and the record labels were interested, but then that would go away and then nobody would be interested. So, but you know, I still play with Don Kerr. He's, you know, one of my most, you know, long running sort of relationships, and he plays with other people too, like Bahamas and Dan Mangan and people like that.
Oh, that's actually really interesting how that came about. And then, were you saying with some of your earlier music, you started off with kind of, I'm gonna say nearly a demo album called Grand Opera Lane, which unfortunately was rejected till, I believe, Interscope Records. And you started writing music at 21, and then you released a self-titled debut afterwards with Interscope. But what I wanted to ask was, when you were being like, how did you get through being told that you weren't able to play for these record labels, and then you got to Interscope? How resilient were you during that period of time?
I had to be very resilient, because I'd been turned down by everyone in Canada. You know, all the labels there, they'd come to see me, but there was never a big crowd at my shows, so they just assumed that I wasn't any good or something. But you know, in Los Angeles, where Interscope is, they don't care what's happening in Toronto in the bars. You know, it doesn't mean anything to them. So the guy that produced Grand Opera Lane, his name was Bobby Wiseman. He knew someone down in LA at Geffen Records, so he sent my cassette Grand Opera Lane down to them, and that kind of changed everything, because there was a fellow by the name of Ronnie Vance who was the head of publishing, and he saw potential in me and offered me, you know, a publishing deal. But then, I mean, it's kind of a long story, but then he got fired, and so about a year later he bounced back at Interscope, and he hadn't forgotten about me. So that was when the kind of door started opening, and but I was already 30, right, or 29 or something. So, which is not, it's not old, but it's kind of old for the music industry. So I really got in. I was very lucky to get in by this, by the seat of my pants or whatever. And my debut album came out in '95, and I was 31.
Oh, so it was a very long road. And then your self-titled debut was disapproved, unfortunately, until Elvis Costello endorsed it, which I think is very interesting. But you had such a long journey towards creating this, and it was being disapproved. So obviously you might have felt upset, but when you got that endorsement from Elvis Costello, such an amazing musician, how did that make you feel?
Well, it came out of nowhere, because my album was only available in North America in '95, and there was a lot of whispers at the label that they were going to drop me. They weren't happy with me. And so in December of '95, when Elvis did that, it changed everything, because suddenly there were people at the label that thought, well, wait a minute, we have to release his music overseas, because that's, I think, where his audience is. And I was a big fan of Elvis, and I hadn't met him or anything. I didn't meet him until February of 1996, when he came to see me play in Nashville. But I was really getting a bit anxious in '95, because I thought I blew my big shot. I had this big record deal, and I was about to be dropped. So it was very stressful. So it's kind of amazing how life works out that way, because if Elvis had done that now, it probably wouldn't have made any difference at all. But at that particular time, people listened when he said something, and so that changed. It gave me a second chance, and thankfully I was able to find my audience in the UK and Ireland and Australia and all these places.
Wow, so it was the story there, that's really incredible. And when I heard about this, because obviously I researched you on when I heard that you were going to join me, when I found out about the story, I thought it was incredible. So it was great to hear it from you. And now I want to go on to something that is an incredible achievement for you. Your music has been covered by Rod Stewart, Michael Bublé, and Nick Lowe. So when you heard these covers of your music, how did that make you feel, knowing that your music was being covered by some of the greatest musicians ever?
Well, that was kind of like a sort of a bonus feature in a way, because my album had come out, and I wasn't selling a lot of records, but I was getting pretty good reviews, from the critics and stuff. And so that was, in music, you can have a really commercially successful career, you can have a critically successful career. And so I was sort of having one of these, I guess, cult following type of careers. So when these other artists started doing my songs, that was just this thing that, when you're a songwriter, you hope that'll happen, right? You want to, you think, because I remember, when in the '60s and that, people like Dylan were getting covered all the time, and Randy Newman and people. So it's really flattering. And I couldn't believe it when I heard Rod Stewart singing Secret Heart, because I'd been a fan of his since forever. And, and now we've had people like Emmylou Harris and Katie Lang, and that. It's just, it's the ultimate honor when you're a songwriter to have your song covered. So.
Wow. And now I want to move on to a totally different aspect to you. And this is very interesting, because I knew you from your music career because I heard you on the radio a lot on the John Creedon show on RTÉ here in Ireland.
Yeah.
But I never knew that you were an author. So I wanted to ask about your fairy tale book, Dear Life. And the first thing that I want to ask you about this is, why did you decide to write a book?
It was kind of, again, it came out of nowhere. I mean, I had this dream, and I didn't know what it was. I didn't know if it was a movie, or I just had this idea. I could see this kid, in the forest, and who accidentally shoots a dog that belongs to a witch, and that's all I had. And I kept telling people about it. Actors and stuff, and say, what do you think of this? And so finally, word got around that I had this idea for a book or something. I didn't know it was a book, and so I got kind of talked into it. These people at it was actually Penguin Books. They told me, yeah, just try to write every day. You can do this. I didn't know. I love reading books, but I didn't think I could ever write one. So I was going out on tour, and every day in the van, I would try to write a chapter. And it was amazing because just how it worked, because I didn't really know how it was going to end or anything. I was sort of felt like I was following the story, and it was very it was unlike anything I'd ever done before, very different than songwriting. And it's not a very big book. Like you could read it in about 2 hours or 3 hours, and it's just a fairy tale, so it's not anything substantial. But I was just really proud of it because I never foresaw that. I mean, it's, and I have so much respect for people who write books, because it takes so much patience, and But anyway, so I think I'm pretty proud of the book. I think if I was an actual novelist, it probably could have been a bit better, but I didn't really know what I was doing.
So yeah, you're just saying it's incredible how you didn't do anything like this before and then you jumped straight into it. So you also mentioned something very interesting, and I think this is very cool, and it just shows how creative you are. You said you pieced together, I don't know, is this physically or in your mind, nearly a score for this, in a way that you saw it kind of as a play.
Yeah.
Could you explain to the listeners what that is? Because I think this is really cool.
Well, that's my dream, for it to be something other than a book. I would love for it to be either a stage play or a movie. And I've been talking with different people, different film companies, and that. But it's really like trying to push a big boulder up a hill, because I'm not from that world, But because I'm a songwriter, when I was writing the book, I kept imagining the characters breaking out into song, I just naturally. And so when we moved from Toronto to a little town called Stratford, and the first year I was here, I just started writing all these songs, and so I've written about 21 songs for a potential musical, and I think they're some of my best songs actually, but it's just hard to get somebody on board, someone to believe in it as much as I do. So at the very least, at some point, I'll probably just make a record of the songs. But I think it has potential to be a really nice sort of family musical, like Oliver Twist or one of those, And so I haven't given up on it. I'm still working at it. So
that's extraordinary. And then you have won 3 Juno Awards, which in itself, again, 1 Juno is pretty good, but you've gotten 3. How did it feel accepting these incredible awards?
Well, in Canada, that's our Grammy, so it was kind of exciting. The first time I won in '98, I felt kind of bad because I won in the roots and traditional category, which I never considered myself a roots and traditional artist. And I remember beating all these people who played fiddles and things, and I felt, well, guilty or something. But the next time I won, it was for Best Songwriter, which is the one that I was hoping to win. And I'd been nominated about 6 times or 7 times prior, and I hadn't won. So it was nice to finally win. And the third one I won for Best Adult Alternative Album. And that was kind of bittersweet because I was in the category with a lot of my friends. So I wanted my friends to win, so it was weird to actually win. You feel a bit guilty. So, but anyway, they're all here on my mantle now. And I haven't been nominated maybe since 2013 was the last time. So I think my days of being nominated might be over, because, you get to a certain age and they sort of forget about you,
Well, you certainly haven't stopped, because I said we'd come back to this, and I'm very excited to talk about your album, The Vivian Line. So if you guys don't know, The Vivian Line is Ron's 17th studio album. And actually, Ron, I was going to explain, but I think you should explain about what the Vivian line is and where is it.
Well, the Vivian line is actually about 5 minutes from my house. It's just a kind of a rural route, you know. It's like a country road, and that whenever we have to get out of town, we drive over to the Vivian line, and it dumps us off at the highway, you know, that takes us to Toronto or wherever. But when we moved to Stratford, I kept seeing the sign, you know, the Vivian line, and it was just intriguing to me because I was wondering, well, who's Vivian, and trying to get the backstory, and I couldn't find any information about it. And so it was just this sort, for me, it's like a portal in a way between my old life in Toronto and my new life here. And it just seemed to be, I always like to try to find an album title that doesn't single out a particular song, but just sort of is, sort of sounds like the way the record sounds, you know. And but yeah, it's just literally a stone's throw from where I'm sitting now. So.
That's brilliant. And I heard about this. You explained about it on an interview, and I thought it was a really beautiful name, and you took it from an amazing inspiration. So I just want to ask about this being your 17th studio album. I've got the CD here. What I want to say though was that when you think back on your whole music career, and when you think, well, what have I achieved? Mm-hmm. Obviously, you've achieved a lot, but being able to say you've wrote maybe 5 studio albums, that's a lot for a person. 10, that's pretty good. 15, that's extraordinary. But 17, that's a lot. And you're still working on music, which is incredible. So I wanted to ask, how does that feel as yourself to go, I've wrote 17 studio albums? Well,
I think because I was already 30 when I got signed, I really felt, I was aware of, you know, the passing of time, and I really wanted to have a body of work. All my heroes were quite prolific, you know. I mean, Dylan and all those people, the Beatles, they made lots of records. And I was just sort of in the zone. I was writing, you know, whenever I was on tour promoting an album, I was generally writing the next record while I was on tour, you know. So I was always keeping ahead of myself. I never wanted to be in a situation where it was time to make another record and I didn't have any songs, or that they wanted me to co-write or something like this. So I'm really not good at anything else. It's just this one thing. It's my superpower, you know. It's this one thing that I work on, that I'm obsessed with. And you know, it's funny because these days, you know, at the last Juno Awards, for example, all the songwriters who were nominated, their songs were written by about 5 or 6 people, every song. And I almost thought they should have a separate category for songs that are written by a committee of people, you know, because all my heroes wrote their own songs, and that's always been really important to me. But it's what I do. Even when I'm cutting the grass, I'm writing songs, or when I'm doing the dishes, I'm writing songs. So it's just so that I think that's how I've managed to have such a, you know, a collection. I'm hoping to get to 20 albums, you know, if possible.
That's 17 in itself is amazing. And now is my final question, and this is very much a personal question. One of the songs on this album, This, That, and the Other Thing, is the 9th track on the Vivian line. And for all the listeners, if you haven't listened to the album, you definitely should. If you're not familiar with Ron's music, you definitely should. And if you're not familiar with this song, you should as well. But no, what I wanted to ask was, as a personal note before we finish, is what is the meaning behind This, That, and the Other Thing?
Well, you know, it's kind of a common expression, you know. You could say, oh, you know, I would do this if not for this, that, and the other thing, you know. They're excuses, really. And it was just a phrase that I overheard somebody say. And as a songwriter, that's, you know, that's something like that will make the light bulb come on over my head. And I wondered if anyone else had ever written a song called This, That, and the Other Thing. and it was just kind of fun to sing. And initially, that's all I had. I didn't have any other lyrics except, this, that, the other thing. And so, then you kind of sort of work backwards. And it's just kind of about all these little annoying things that keep us from doing what we really want to be doing, and whether it's someone knocking at the door, the phone ringing, or something. And on this particular record, it's kind of like, it's sort of a standout track because the album is quite folky. Most of the album is like this Baroque folk pop kind of stuff, until you get to that song where it's sort of a funky song. It's almost like sort of a Bill Withers kind of thing. And so I think it's nice at that when it appears on the record, it's kind of unexpected, and at least that's why we sort of sequenced it that way. But yeah, so it's just a common expression, which a lot of songwriters do. They'll just take some, a phrase that you've heard that's used in everyday life, and they'll turn it into a song, which is what I tried to do.
Well, thank you for answering that. That's my favorite song of yours, and awesome. That was a brilliant thing to end on. So, before we finish up, I just wanted to ask you, Ron, could you tell the listeners about where they can find you, your music, and your website?
Well, my website is ronsexsmith.com, and it has pretty much all the latest information of of shows. We have a big show coming up, for example, in February next year called Sexsmith at 60. I'm turning 60 in January, and that's at the Massey Hall, which is kind of a legendary venue here in Toronto. That's February 29. And, we have I think that's probably the best place to go, really, to get information. I'm also on Twitter, and my wife has an account called Mrs. Ron Boy on Instagram as well that has the latest info and stuff. But I'm not too hard to find. I'm kind of out there trying to keep up. I don't have a cell phone, so I'm not very, 21st century or anything, but anyway, I'm getting there.
I will have all the links on my website on the page. Thank you so much, Ron. You were brilliant to interview. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Yeah, we're big fans here. You keep up the good work. We think you're great. So
thanks, Ron.
All right, cheers.
Bye.
Take care. Bye.
Bye.
I hope you enjoyed listening to this episode of Logan Sounds Off. You can follow me on X, Facebook and Instagram at Logan Sounds Off. And don't forget to subscribe and not miss any more cool episodes. Bye guys!